Ida B. Wells-Barnett was a women's and civil rights activist who used journalism to expose and reveal the treatment and harsh realities of African Americans in the South during the late 19th century and early 20th century. Ida was born on July 16, 1862, in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She lived with her parents, who were both former slaves, and was the oldest of 8 siblings. When she was just 16 years old, both of her parents died from yellow fever. This resulted in Ida being left to care for her family. Ida attended Rusk College, formerly known as Shaw College, a historically black liberal arts school, but once her parents passed, she had to drop out to take care of her family. She then continued her education years later at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. While Ida was struggling to take care of her family, she began working as a schoolteacher in a segregated all African American school. Her main passion, however, remained journalism. She would often write about the harsh conditions occurring in the schools that she taught in. She was later fired for doing this. In the year 1877, Wells had been riding on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad when she was asked to move to the back of the car. After refusing, Ida was forcibly removed from the train. She later tried suing the railroad company, and although she won the case at the local level, it was overturned in federal court. Continuing her passion and love for journalism, Ida began to use the pen name Lola in the Living Way newspaper to write her articles. She began writing about Jim Crow policies and often attacking the racist articles that she found, and even was offered an editorial position for the Evening Star in Washington, D.C. In 1889, a friend of Ida's, Thomas Moss, had opened a grocery store called the People's Grocery, across the street from a white-owned grocery store. After a fight had broken out in front of the store, several white men and women had set out to get revenge on what had happened. Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart, all African American workers and co-owners of the People's Grocery Store, were lynched on March 9, 1892, for the disputes that had occurred. Thomas's last words were, "Tell my people to go west. There is no justice for them here." This event started Ida's campaign for justice. These brutal killings awoke a fire inside of Ida. She decided to write several articles exposing the true realities of lynching and wrongful deaths of African Americans. She urged blacks to leave Memphis. She interviewed several people linked to these brutal killings in efforts to do her own investigations. After publishing all of her articles, white people began to get enraged. While Ida was out of town, a mob rampaged and stormed her office, setting it on fire. She was warned that if she were to return again to Memphis, she would be killed. With this information, she picked up her life and started again in Chicago, Illinois. While relocating in Chicago, Ida met Ferdinand Barnett while working together protesting for African American rights. In 1895, the two got married and later became a family of 8. Barnett founded the first black newspaper, the Chicago Conservator, and Ida not only began writing articles for the paper, but later became editor. Without wasting any time, Ida began an editorial campaign against lynching. She became a lecturer and an organizer of anti-lynching events. She published several articles in the Chicago Conservator, which raised much awareness to the situations occurring all across the nation. Ida also began becoming active in organizing African American women, such as the suffrage movement. She would often question the white suffragists who ignored the lynchings and discrimination of African Americans. Because of this, she was marginalized by the suffrage movement. However, that did not stop her. She still remained active in the movement. As Ida began becoming more influential in the women's rights movement, she became the founder of the National Association of Colored Women's Club, which addressed issues dealing with both civil rights and women's rights, and had the main goal of promoting equality for African American women. From the years 1898 to 1902, Wells served as secretary and founder of the National Afro-American Council. This council was the first nationwide civil rights organization in the United States. It was formed to raise awareness of lynchings and disenfranchisement of African Americans. In 1909, Ida participated in the Niagara Movement, which was a black civil rights organization led by W.E.B. Du Bois, and she was also one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a civil rights organization to advance justice for African Americans. A year later, Wells founded and became president of the Negro Fellowship League, which focused on helping migrants from the South who newly arrived in Chicago. In 1913, she also founded the first black women's suffrage group, Chicago's Alpha Suffrage Club, which aimed to give a voice to all African American women. Between the years of 1913 and 1916, Ida served as a probation officer for the Chicago Municipal Court. She often aimed for justice for African Americans. However, she was insistent that justice be won by their own efforts. Ida B. Wells-Barnett spent her entire life advocating for civil rights, women's rights, but most importantly, human rights. The role she played in helping African Americans advance through multiple phases of their lives will never be forgotten. She shed light on the truth and harsh realisms that no one wanted to believe. As Ida once said, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." When reflecting back on all that she has accomplished, Ida is a true role model. She deserves more coverage and recognition throughout our nation. Throughout all adversity, she never backed down. Her resiliency and perseverance is truly inspiring.